Hey friend, Joey Wiedner here. Very warm welcome to you and thank you for joining me. So today I want to help you to start to think like Jimi Hendrix. We're going to be doing this by exploring his song Hey Joe through the lens of the CAGED system. We'll be talking about triads, improvisation, playing with feeling, playing with intention, and just trying to get a better understanding of the fretboard and how we can start to put all these shapes together. So the first thing to talk about with this song are the chords, right? If you've never learned it before, here they are. It's one of the first songs I think a lot of people learn. It certainly was for me anyway, a big step by learning this song. So the chords are C, G, D, A, and E. So these are in fact the chords from the CAGED system, right? They're all the chords from the CAGED system are root position chord shapes, basically. That's all the CAGED system is fundamentally. It's just these, all the root position chord shapes that exist on the guitar, right? There's 5 shapes, and after that they basically just, you got to start moving them up to the neck to get any other different chords out of them, right? It's the basic principle of the CAGED system. So the good thing about exploring it through the lens of a song is it doesn't seem as much like a technical exercise, right? You can actually start to wrap your head around it and you can start to actually use the CAGED system to play music, basically, right? So the first thing we'll talk about is just taking 2 chords at a time. Let's say C and G, right? The first 2 chords. And let's just see, can we, just using those shapes, move through the rest of the progression, okay? So the next chord is D, okay? So D is in fact, if you think about, let's just go back to your C for a second, that much of your C is actually like a D shape, right? When you think about it, it's like you're holding a D like that above the note of the guitar, okay? So let's just move this up 2, right? And let's just visualize a C shape here now. So it would be like, it's like if you put a capo on here, okay? So that'd be a C shape D. I know it gets very confusing very quickly. Trust me, I understand that. Right? So you can see that the D shape, this D triad basically at the top here, is half of a C, right? They're intrinsically linked together. Okay? Same thing is true about the G. So the middle section of a G here, this triad, triad just means 3 notes. We won't get too lost in the weeds of triads just yet, right? But if you just take those 3 notes there, the D, G, and the B string, if we move these up, that's what is creating our A chord shape, right? But we can do the same with the bottom and top of it as well, right? And then again, it's just like as if you put a capo on the 2nd fret. Right, so we went G, and then we moved it up 1, and then we moved it up 1 more. Okay? So now we've gone C to G, then we've gone C-shaped D to G-shaped A. Okay? We're going to find one more C shape. It's going to be a C-shaped E. Right, so we're just going to apply the same principle we did going from the C to the D. We're just going to move up 2 more frets, all right? So we're going to move this D shape, move it up 1, we get D sharp, move it up another 1, we get E. You can even use the low E string there if you like. It's a nice chord shape, right? So now we've gone C, G, C-shaped D, G-shaped A. You know, you don't have to do, by the way, I should have said that, you don't have to do the full whack like I'm doing. I just wanted to give you the whole visual of the chord shape. But if you even just get a little small bit of these at the time, that's totally fine too. It's really just to visualize it. So we went C, G, C-shaped D, G-shaped A. I know, getting confused myself already. And then we went a C-shaped E. So we basically used these two chord shapes to move up the fretboard. The other thing I got to tell you as well is this song, it goes through a cycle of fifths basically, right? So you're going from, if you imagine you're in the key of C, and C is your 1 chord, and you're moving to your 5 chord if we're talking about a blues, right? Your 5 chord would be G. And now if you're in the key of G, moving to the 5 chord, it would be going to D, right? D will be going to A, and A will be going to E. So there's a lot of, this will make a bit more sense as we move through the chord shapes. There's a lot of kind of repeating patterns happening here basically as we move up the fretboard. Doing it down here with the root position chords, each shape looks completely different. But when we use two chord shapes that are parallel to each other, you start to see how these kind of map out on the fretboard a bit better, right? So we'll keep going through. So we did C and G. So now we'll do D and A shapes now, right? So if we just imagine, right, a D major triad here just in these bottom 3 strings. So that's our C. Let's just call that our D-shaped C right now, okay? And our A-shaped G, be just doing something like that if you think about it, really, right? That's like moving this down, right? Okay, D-A, and then that'll be your D-shaped E, okay? And like I said before, it's just intrinsically linked to this C shape as well, right? So we went, that's talking about it in terms of triads, okay? So now we'll do A to E, and if you're getting confused or this is all going over your head, just stick with me, okay? Because it takes me a long time to understand and learn this stuff too, and a lot of the time you just have to keep fiddling around basically until it clicks into place, right? So let's just try this one now. So we'll go A to E, right? A shape to E shape. So this is where we're going to really talk about the technical details of the CAGED system. So the CAGED system, it goes in that order up the fretboard, C, A, G, E, D, right? So it's not in the order of the Hajo chords, it's C, A, G, E, D, like the word caged. So that means that C is linked to A, which is linked to G, which is linked to E, which is linked to D. That's how they're all tied together, basically, right? So to find an A-shaped C, we'd have this fret in common, right? We'd have this root note in common because A comes after C in the CAGED system. So you're always going to have something in common with the previous shape. So in this example, we've got this fret in common. This root note here is going to be the same root note we're going to use for the A shape, but we're going to basically move the triad. We're going to flip it over that fret, okay? We're going to invert the triad upside down, basically, right? That's kind of one way of thinking about it. So we're going to go from this shape, we're going to flip these over, we're going to swap our finger. So instead of this finger, we're going to put that finger there, and then we're going to put our triad up like that, like an A-shaped triad, right? So we went from C to an A shape, okay? And now the same thing is true for G to E, okay? So another thing to bear in mind with the CAGED system and triads and everything with the fretboard, it's like a conveyor belt, right? You're just jumping on at different points. The sequence is always the same, but you're just jumping on at different points, basically, right? At different parts of the neck. So going from G to E, it's the same thing. We're in order now of the CAGED system, C, A, G, E, okay? So apply the same principle here. So we're flipping over this fret, okay, and this kind of chunk here is going to be turned into something else up here. We're thinking about an E shape up here, okay? This is our root note, so it's going to be from this, swap these fingers. Now, there we go. We've gone from a G shape to an E shape, okay? So now, let's move through the rest of the chords now, right? So A-shaped C, E-shaped G. Now let's find an A-shaped D. Okay, so if you just think about in terms of, you know, alphabetically basically, right? C, C sharp, D. There's my D. That's one way you can kind of figure these things out. Okay, so we went C, we went to G, we went D, and then, like I said, there's this pattern moving through the fifths. So here it is, going from this bar chord shape to this bar chord shape is going from like a 1 to a 5 kind of idea, right? So 1, 5, 1, 5, and also going from here to here is going from a 1 to a 5. Okay, 1, 5, and then to get to E, we do the same thing. D, D sharp, E. You know, is one way of thinking about it. Or you can just use the pattern that we've used so far, basically going like that to there, and then moving up to, going back to an A shape, and then we're going up to E, okay? So I mentioned at the start of the video, we're going to talk about how to use this to think like Jimi Hendrix and start to improvise and play with feeling and intention, right? All that good stuff. But first, you just have to have some bit of a foundation of the stuff I've just talked about, right? If it's totally going over your head, I would suggest maybe just sitting with that for a while, letting it percolate, and just whenever you get the chance to sit down with your guitar, just try and fiddle around with this stuff a little bit, right? Because for me, that's how it always worked, learning this kind of stuff. It's just I have to just sit with it for a couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months, couple of years, however long it takes for it to really just kind of get soaked in, right? But one way we can start to think about this in terms of like how would Hendrix use this stuff, right? So let's just take these little chunks out of these clunky chord shapes that we figured out, right? So we'll just talk about the top 3 strings. So that would be from our A shape, right? It would be, and that's a root position triad, right? That's a 1, 3, 5. First note from the major scale, third note from the major scale, fifth note from the major scale. It's all a major triad is, right? So the next triad we're going to look for is coming out of this E shape, right? So we're going to use the top half of that. So we're going to use the, and this is what you call a first inversion triad. All an inversion means is that the notes are just, they happen in a different order. So now we've got the third at the bottom, fifth in the middle, and the root note on top, okay? So slightly different sound. So we're going from a root position C major triad, right, to a first inversion G triad. But I don't want to bog you down with the technical details. I just wanted to have that in the back of your mind, okay? So now we can do the same move 2 frets up, going from the D to the A, right? And then you can move it 2 more frets up to get the E. So if you're playing lead guitar, let's say, and someone else is playing the rhythm, this gives you already some nice stuff you can do to make it sound more Hendrix, you know, even if you just pluck out the notes and slide into them. Or you can start to copy and paste some of these licks up and down, because it's the same pattern, right? So we can go something like that. So that's hammering on the B string there, right? So I'm barring down here with my index, and I'm holding down the G string there with my ring finger, and then I'm doing something like that, and then I'm sliding in the next triad. So I'm going, same thing up here. Very Hendrixy. So that's a hammer on and a pull off. You know, that's already sounding pretty cool to me. So now let's talk about the lower strings, okay? So let's just take the bottom three of each chord shape. So for C it would be the A string, the D, and the G. Right? So this technically isn't a triad when you do this, right? This is more like a power chord. We've got a root note, a fifth, and another root note. So it's neither major or minor because we don't have the third in there, right? But what we can do to make it sound really Hendrixy is, if this is a root note 1, talking about the major scale, 1, 2, if we stay in the 1 string, 3, okay, 1, 2, 3. So there's our third on the A string, okay? So a very common thing you'll hear Hendrix and John Frusciante, John Mayer, all these guys do, and even a lot of blues music, is this kind of move. This kind of thing, right? So what you're doing is, like I said about the CAGED system, where we're pivoting around a fret, we're pivoting around this 5th fret kind of triad chunk here in the middle, this A shape, right? So we're going from the root note down here, and we're moving it up here, right? So we're swapping this finger with that, okay? And then we're, instead of holding down the root note, we're now holding down the third on the A string. So that would be, instead of this, we've got, and when you hammer that on, right? So if you hold down the A string just put 2 frets below it and hammer it on, it's the same notes as going, right? Because that's going from, that's hammering on a major third there as well, right? We're just doing the same thing on the lower strings now, right? And you can go up to the next string and do a similar thing, right? So you can apply the same principle to the E shape basically, right? For the G chord now in the sequence. So we're going. So this is essentially doing the same thing. You're going from a power chord, a 1-5-1, up to a triad, a first inversion triad with the major third at the bottom. 3-5-1. So it's the same as going. Same as that shape we used before, right? Okay. Now we can apply this all through the chord sequence. So we can go G, D, A, E. Right, so if you do kind of in context, starts to sound more and more like Hendrix, right? And then you combine these two concepts together, right? Using the higher strings and the lower strings. This will take time. So if you really slow this down, right? So if you do something like this. Few other things going on there, but I just wanted to show you how you can start yourself, right? You can just start to chop and change these together, and you can always go back to the root position chords or any of these chord shapes we use. That's the idea here. You take all the stuff you kind of work through and just see, can you slowly start to bring it into the progression, these different shapes up and down the neck. So if you started it, let's say here, and then you just start moving it up. One more thing I gotta mention as well, because I just caught myself doing it there. For these triad shapes in particular, this kind of Johnny Be Good, idea, right? Third, fifth, and root note. I guess it's a first inversion triad. The very typical Hendrix thing would be to use the thumb. Instead of doing this big clunky bar chord, you'd have his thumb here, he'd have this triad, and he'd just be hitting the D string as well, right? So you're getting another triad there as well. I'm playing a G chord here, by the way, right? So we've got a root position triad, 1, 3, 5 from the D string, G string, and the B. And then we've got a 3, 5, 1 at the top. So we're basically leaving out the A string, right? The A string is just getting muted by the kind of pad of my thumb there. It's a very common Hendrix trick, Hendrix maneuver, right? And what it allows you to do is it frees up your pinky to do all that kind of nice stuff, right? So even if we start to incorporate stuff like that now as well, right? So we've got that kind of thing, right? Up to the next chord, D, A, E. Another thing that you should keep trying with this chord progression in particular is any nice little fill that you figure out, like that thing we were doing, or any of these little maneuvers that you've figured out sound nice, right? Just try them in the next position, chord shape. Up to the next chord. And that'll just give you so many nice options that are, you know, different from just fiddling through the minor pentatonic or whatever. It gives you a much more musical approach to playing the guitar, basically, when you start to think of it like this. So I'm going to leave you with one last thing. This is a little bit maybe more advanced, right? But this is something you'll hear in a lot of John Mayer's music, for example. It's the sixth inversion, it's called, right? And again, it comes from our chord shapes. So you can do these all over the fretboard. But just for example, again, going back to our A and E shapes, right? So the A position one, the A-shaped one, would be like this, right? So if you've ever done this blues lick, that kind of thing, right? It's essentially the same concept, right? We're just doing it on thicker strings now. So we're doing the D string and the B string on the 5th fret. Again, it's just coming from this. So it's the 5th and the 3rd. So we're leaving out the root. Okay. The next one would be to hit that G. We're going to be using the 5th and the 3rd from this E shape. So we're going to be using the A and the G string. And they sound great when you slide them in as well. And then you can just do the same thing for the D, for the A. So I'm sliding up the lower string from 2 frets below, and then I'm hitting the 3rd, right? And then E. So that's it for today. I hope you learned something, and appreciate you sticking around till the end. If you have any questions or anything, let me know in the comments. If you have other topics you'd like me to talk about in this channel, please do let me know. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Peace out.